The wind tore across the desert like an open wound, carrying the smell of smoke, sweat, and something that clung to bones and never left. Sand stung the girl's face as she stumbled forward, clutching the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fabric was stiff with dirt, darkened with blood, and worn so thin that the desert light seemed to pass through it. "I'm already dead inside," she whispered, her voice breaking into the endless horizon. Her name was Eliza Dalton, though. She hadn't spoken it aloud in so long that the syllables felt foreign in her own mouth. She was 20, maybe, though hardship had carved years onto her face. Her eyes were a shade of green once described as spring by her mother, but spring had been stolen from her long ago. Now they were the color of glass shattered in the sun, empty, dangerous if handled carelessly. She didn't notice the rider until it was too late. The hoofbeats came like a drum roll over stone, steady, unhurried, the sound of a man who feared nothing on this land. A shadow broke across the sand, and then he was there, an Apache warrior astride a painted horse, the beast's nostrils flaring, mane tangled with beads and feathers that caught the dying light. He slid from the saddle, in one fluid motion, boots crunching into the dust. He was tall, broad-shouldered, bare-chested but adorned in leather bands, bone necklaces, and a knife at his hip that had seen too many battles. His black hair fell like a river over his shoulders, and his dark eyes narrowed on her with a mixture of suspicion and hunger, though not the hunger of a beast, but of a man who wanted to know why a ghost dared wander his land. Eliza did not move. She had no strength left for running, no voice left for pleading. She just clutched the shawl tighter, even as his shadow fell over her. The warrior spoke in low, measured English, each word deliberate. "What do you hide?" Her cracked lips curved into something between a smirk and a grimace. Nothing worth seeing, but his gaze hardened. His hand lifted slowly, deliberately, like a hawk extending its talon. He reached for the shawl, his fingers brushing rough fabric. She didn't fight. She didn't even flinch. When he yanked it free, the desert wind caught it like a banner, twisting it out of his grip. The warrior froze. Beneath the shawl, her back and shoulders were not just skin and flesh, they were a map of suffering. Jagged scars crisscrossed like rivers dried by fire. Deep, ugly brands burned into her flesh in shapes that carried no meaning except cruelty. Some wounds had healed, others never had. Her body was a battlefield, and she was its lone survivor. For the first time, Eliza lifted her chin and looked him in the eye. "Now you see," she said, her voice dry as dust. "I told you. I'm already dead inside." The warrior did not answer. His hand, which had reached in violence, now trembled. At his side, he had seen men gutted, scalps taken, villages razed. He had seen what war did, but he had never seen a single person carry so much ruin on their own body. He expected a white settler woman to beg, to scream, to curse him as savage. But this girl did none of that. She looked at him like one hollow soul looks at another, and the desert between them suddenly felt different, less like a battlefield and more like a graveyard. The silence stretched, heavy as stone. His horse snorted, pawing the ground, impatient. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed, slicing through the air. Eliza swayed on her feet, her body too frail to hold itself up much longer. She pressed one hand to her side, blood seeping through. A tear in her dress she had tried to hide. The warrior caught the movement, his sharp eyes narrowing. "You bleed," he said flatly, "and still I walk." She answered. Something flickered in his eyes, then something not quite pity, but recognition. He had bled and walked too. He knew what it meant to keep moving long after your soul had given up. When the wind settled, the shawl lay in the sand between them like a banner of truce. Neither bent to pick it up. For the first time, the Apache warrior did not see an enemy. He did not see a settler girl. He did not even see prey. He saw a ghost of survival standing before him with nothing left to lose. The desert night came quickly, swallowing the last of the red sun in a curtain of violet and black. Stars burned through the emptiness, cold and distant, but Eliza barely noticed. She sat slumped against a stone outcrop, her shawl wrapped tight. Once more, though it could never truly cover what had been shown, Tohani warrior had built a small fire. Sparks leapt upward, drifting into the sky like fragments of lost souls. He crouched beside it, silent, his broad frame illuminated by the glow. He had not touched her since ripping away the shawl, and Eliza could not decide if that silence was a mercy or a judgment. She shifted, the raw flesh on her back brushing against the stone, sending a shiver through her. Her body remembered pain as if it were a language it could never unlearn. She pulled the shawl tighter, pressing her knees to her chest, though nothing could warm her. "You came far," Tohani said at last, his English low, thick with the cadence of his people. His eyes stayed on the fire, not on her. Eliza's throat tightened. Her voice scraped like gravel when she answered. "Far enough to lose everything." The words cracked something open inside her, and memories bled into the night. She had lived once in a clapboard house at Carson Bluffs, a lonely stretch of prairie where the wind carried the smell of wheat and sage. Her father had built the place with his own calloused hands. He was a farmer, stubborn as the earth, and he had filled their home with the laughter of 3 daughters. Eliza had been the youngest. She could still remember the way her mother sang while tending to the stove, her older sisters braiding her hair on lazy afternoons. And she could remember, too vividly, the night it all turned to ash. Not natives, not the wild tribes that settlers spoke of in fearful whispers, but white men masked by dust and greed. They came not for war but for plunder, and they found it in her family's fields. The house was set ablaze, flames roaring so bright they turned the night to day. Her sister's screams tore through the smoke. Her father fought until a bullet cut him down. Her mother dragged her toward the door before a whip tore across her back and sent her crashing into darkness. When she woke, the house was cinders, her family gone. And she was not free. She was theirs. The men kept her, branded her, scarred her with fire and blade until she no longer felt human, only marked like cattle. She had escaped once, bloodied and stumbling into the desert with nothing but the shawl clinging to her shoulders. She had walked for days, her body breaking, but the thought of their hands dragging her back was worse than death. Now here she was, seated across from a warrior whose people settlers blamed for every cruelty, yet he had not harmed her. Instead, he watched the fire as if it held answers neither of them could name. Eliza swallowed, her throat dry. "You wanted to see. Now you know." Tohani finally turned his gaze on her, dark eyes catching the firelight. He did not look away. "I see," he said simply. She braced for mockery or disgust or worse pity, but none came. His expression was unreadable, carved from the same stone as the canyon walls. Yet she sensed something else beneath. Eliza clenched her hands until her nails dug into her palms. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I wasn't supposed to live. I wish I hadn't." The warrior's brow furrowed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached for a stick, prodding the fire until sparks rose again. "You walk still," he said. "The earth does not let you go." That means something. His words struck her harder than a whip ever had. She hated him for saying them, hated the way they cracked through the armor of numbness she had built. Tears stung her eyes, and she turned her face away, ashamed of them. The desert was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Eliza pressed the shawl closer, rocking slightly as if to soothe herself. She did not want meaning. She wanted to forget, but as she stared into the flames, the memory of her house burning returned, vivid and merciless, and she realized she could never truly forget. and across from her, Tohani kept watch, silent and unmoving, as if guarding not just her broken body but the fragments of her spirit she thought had been lost to the ashes of yesterday. The desert had its own kind of silence, one that pressed against the chest until a person thought they might break. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the hollow quiet of a place that had already seen too much and carried no interest in comforting the living. Eliza lay curled against the rock wall as the night deepened, her body stiff with exhaustion. The shawl clung to her like a second skin, but it could not keep out the cold that seeped from the canyon walls. The fire crackled in uneven bursts, spitting sparks into the sky. She stared into it until her eyes blurred, flames twisting into shapes she almost recognized: her mother's face, her father's strong shoulders, her sister's braids, but each vision dissolved before she could hold it. Tohani sat across from her, his legs folded beneath him, his bare chest painted in tiny, shifting shadows of firelight. His long black hair shimmered as the flames danced. He had not spoken for a long time, yet his silence felt heavy, purposeful, as though he were weighing every thought before deciding whether it was worth sharing. Finally, his voice cut into the air, deep and steady. "Why didn't you scream?" The question startled her. She blinked, meeting his eyes across the fire. "What?" "When they burned you," he said, his words measured low as if even he wasn't certain he should ask. "When they cut you." "Why didn't you scream?" Eliza's stomach clenched. For a moment she thought she might retch, but then her body went still. She let out a long, bitter breath that felt like sand scraping her lungs, because screaming never saved anyone. Her voice was flat, but it rang like a gunshot in the canyon. The desert wind stilled, coyotes in the distance cut their yipping short, and the flames even seemed to settle. Tohani's gaze was unblinking. His expression did not soften, but there was no cruelty in his eyes, only a searching that unnerved her. He had asked expecting a broken explanation. What he got instead was something raw, something that belonged not to a victim but to someone who had survived beyond reason. Eliza turned her face from the fire, staring up at the jagged outline of the cliffs. The stars burned so cold and distant it made her ache. "Do you know what happens when you scream?" she said, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. "They laugh. They enjoy it. The sound becomes fuel for them. So you stop. You go quiet. You let them do their worst, and you hold the scream inside until it dies with the rest of you." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her words had spilled too quickly, and she hated herself for giving him so much. The shawl slipped slightly from her shoulder, revealing the edge of a scar. She tugged it back into place, biting her lip until she tasted blood. Tohani did not look away. He nodded once, slowly, as if her words were not just understood but remembered. "Yes," he said. "Silence is also a weapon." The fire popped. A cinder drifted upward and vanished. Eliza frowned, studying him, uncertain what to make of that. A weapon. That was not how she had thought of it. To her, silence had been surrender, defeat. Yet this man spoke of it as if it were power. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting the sting in them. She would not cry, not in front of him, not in front of anyone. When she opened them again, he was still watching her, his eyes like storm clouds, unreadable but alive with something she couldn't quite name. "Why do you care?" she asked, sharper than she intended. Tohani tilted his head, his face unreadable in the flickering glow. "I do not care," he said finally, "but I see." Eliza felt anger surge, hot and unexpected. "See what?" "Another broken white girl, lost in the desert? Another burden you'll leave for the coyotes when I can't walk anymore?" But the warrior didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on hers, steady, as though her rage did not wound him. Instead, he leaned closer to the fire, the shadows deepening. the scars on his arms marks of battles he had fought long before her path crossed his. "I see someone who still breathes," he said. The words hit her harder than she wanted them to. She turned away quickly, clutching the shawl, her jaw trembling with an emotion she refused to name. Above them, the stars stretched on forever, sharp and endless, a hollow sky that seemed to echo her emptiness back at her. And yet, across the fire, she felt the weight of Tohani's gaze, unyielding, silent, and somehow unbearably human. Dawn bled across the desert in streaks of copper and gold, the light sharp as knives against the canyon walls. Eliza stirred awake with the taste of ash still on her tongue. Her sleep had been shallow, filled with flashes of burning houses and cruel laughter, the ghosts of her past chasing her even in dreams. Tohani was already moving. She blinked and saw him crouch low over the sand, his fingers brushing the earth with deliberate care. His long black hair fell over his shoulders, his bare chest gleaming with morning light. He looked less like a man than a creature carved from the land itself. "What is it?" Eliza croaked, her voice still hoarse from the night before. He didn't answer right away. His hand hovered over the ground, tracing faint imprints in the dust. Finally, he spoke. "Boots. 3. No, 4. They passed here not long ago." Her stomach tightened, twisting itself into a knot. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the morning was warm. "It's them," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word, and shame crawled up her throat. Tohani looked up sharply. "You know these men?" Eliza's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. She could see their faces in her mind, the grins hidden under sweat-stained hats, the glint of knives, the brand glowing hot in the fire before it seared her flesh. She nodded slowly. "I know them." Her voice failed. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The warrior's jaw tightened. He rose smoothly to his feet, standing tall against the rising sun. His muscles flexed as he adjusted the knife at his belt. His dark eyes narrowed, scanning the canyon as if he could already sense the men closing in. "They come for you," he said. Eliza felt the ground tilt beneath her. For so long she had believed she had escaped, that the desert had swallowed her past and left her to wander alone. But of course they would come. Men like that didn't leave loose ends. They had marked her as theirs, and to them, she was still property-scarred flesh to be dragged back into their cruelty. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself against the stone wall. "I can't." She shook her head violently, clutching the shawl until her knuckles whitened. "I can't do it again." Tohani turned to her, his face unreadable but his voice steady. "You walked through fire and lived. Do not tell me what you cannot do." His words struck like a whip, but they carried no malice. He was not mocking her. He was calling something out of her she had buried long ago. Eliza's lips trembled. "You don't understand." She stopped, choking on the memory. Her scars throbbed beneath the shawl, as if remembering the heat of the brand. She sank down onto the rock, curling into herself. Tohani knelt in front of her, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. For the first time, his voice softened. "I do understand. Men who take what is not theirs. Men who believe pain makes them strong. I have fought them all my life." Eliza searched his face, looking for cruelty, for indifference, but found none, only truth. His dark eyes reflected the fire of his own battles, the weight of his own scars. "Then you know," she whispered. He nodded once. "Yes, I know." The silence between them thickened, filled with everything unspoken, her terror, his resolve, the sound of approaching death already written in the dust. Finally, Tohani rose, his figure tall and unyielding against the brightening sky. "If they come, they will not leave." Eliza stared at him, her breath caught in her chest. A part of her wanted to believe him, to let his strength shield her. But another part trembled with the memory of chains. Her voice was a whisper, fragile and breaking. And if they take me back? Tohani's hand rested on the hilt of his knife, his face set in stone. Then they will have to take me first. The words hung in the morning air like an oath. For the first time in years, Eliza felt the faintest flicker of something she thought had died with her family. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. The trail of blood was coming closer, and this time she was not alone. The day dragged like a slow knife across the skin. Eliza and Tohani kept to the canyon's shadows, the jagged cliffs offering meager cover from the blistering sun. She had not spoken much since dawn, her fear coiling tighter with every passing hour. Her scars seemed to burn beneath her shawl, as though her body already knew what was coming. By dusk, the desert began to cool, and the silence fractured. Laughter echoed faintly off the stone walls, carried on the evening wind. It was a sound Eliza knew too well, mocking, cruel, and careless. Her pulse hammered in her throat. "They're here," she whispered. Tohani was already standing, his knife drawn. He moved with a stillness that was not hesitation but calculation, his body balanced like a coiled predator. His long black hair stirred in the breeze, and the firelight from their small camp caught the sharp edges of his muscles. His eyes, dark and unblinking, watched the canyon mouth. The raiders came with the arrogance of men who had never been denied. 4 of them, their boots striking the ground like hammers, guns and whips hanging at their sides. Their faces were shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, but Eliza didn't need to see them clearly. She knew their voices, their walk, the way they looked at her as if she were already theirs again. One spat into the dirt, grinning wide. "Well, looky here, our little bird found herself a cage." Eliza pressed back against the rock, her breath shallow, her fingers gripping the shawl so hard the threads tore beneath her nails. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The man with the whip flicked it lazily, the crack splitting the air. "You think you can run forever, girl? You think anyone out here gonna save you?" His gaze shifted to Tohani, who stood silent, unmoving like the stone cliffs themselves. "Or maybe you think this redskin's gonna protect you?" He laughed, a sound as sharp as broken glass. Tohani's voice cut through the canyon, low and steady. "Leave." The laughter stopped. For a moment, the raiders blinked, surprised by the calm finality in his tone. Then the leader sneered. "Or what? You think you can take us all, Injun? You're one man." Tohani's grip tightened on his blade. His body tensed, every muscle ready to strike. He glanced at Eliza just once, and she caught at the promise in his eyes. "You are not alone." When the first man lunged, the canyon erupted. Tohani moved like lightning, his body a blur of muscle and fury. His blade caught the fire's reflection as it slashed through the air, and the raider's scream echoed against the stone. Another drew his pistol, but Tohani was already there, knocking the weapon aside and driving him into the dirt. The canyon filled with chaos. Boots scraped against stone, fists and blades clashed, gunfire cracked like thunder. The smell of smoke and iron filled the air, thick and choking. Eliza pressed herself into the rock, her body shaking uncontrollably. The whip snapped past her face, striking sparks from the stone. She screamed without sound, her voice lost inside her chest. Then she saw it, the raider with the whip. Raising his arm again, his face twisted with the same cruel joy she remembered. From the night her family burned, something inside her broke loose. "No!" The word tore from her throat, ragged and desperate. She snatched a rock from the ground and hurled it with all the strength left in her body. It struck his temple, staggering him just long enough for Tohani to turn. The warrior was upon him in a heartbeat, his blade flashing in the dying light. The whip fell useless to the ground, blood soaking into the sand. The last raider fired wildly, bullets sparking against the canyon wall. Tohani charged through the gun smoke, silent and relentless, until the man's pistol clattered from his grasp and the fight was over. Silence crashed down again, heavy and absolute. The only sound was Eliza's ragged breathing and the crackle of their dying fire. Bodies sprawled across the canyon floor, dust settling like a shroud. Tohani stood among them, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. His blade dripped red, his dark eyes scanning the horizon as if more enemies might crawl from the dusk. Eliza's knees gave way, and she slid down the rock, the shawl pooling around her like ashes. Her whole body shook. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You fought for me." Tohani's gaze met hers. He said nothing, but the truth was written in the set of his jaw, in the blood on his hands, in the fact that she was still alive. For the first time in years, Eliza felt something stir inside her chest, a fragile ember where there had only been cold. The battle was over. But the war within her had only just begun. The bodies were buried before dawn. Tohani worked silently, his strong hands cutting into the earth with steady rhythm, while Eliza stood a little distance away, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. She tried not to look at the blood, still darkening the sand, but the copper tang hung heavy in the air, seeping into her lungs with every breath. By the time the sun rose, the canyon floor was clean. Only disturbed earth remained, shallow mounds lined against the cliff like warnings, carved into the desert itself. Tohani wiped his blade against his armband and sheathed it. Not once did he look at her as he finished. Eliza wanted to speak, but her voice had turned to stone inside her chest. She had seen men die before her parents, her neighbors, her kin. But she had never seen anyone fight for her, not like this. She didn't know if she deserved it. That evening, they made camp by a dry wash where the fire burned low and smoke curled into the violet sky. Eliza huddled close to the flames, her shawl drawn up as if it could swallow her whole. The firelight painted her face in golden shadow, highlighting the jagged ridges of scar tissue along her cheek. She had spent years keeping her face hidden, but now, under his gaze, she felt stripped bare. Tohani sat across from her, silent as always, but his eyes did not waver. He seemed carved from stone, broad shoulders glistening with sweat, muscles relaxed but alert, his long hair tied loosely with leather cord. Tribal jewelry of bone and copper gleamed in the firelight, reminding her of a world so different from the one that had destroyed hers. At last, she broke. "I'm already dead inside," Eliza whispered, the words tearing through the silence. Her fingers dug into the shawl, clutching it tighter. "You think you saved me, but you didn't. I was gone long before you pulled me from that fire." Tohani did not move. His dark eyes held hers, unflinching, as though he could see beyond the scars, beyond the words, into the marrow of who she was. Her throat ached. She wanted to stop, but the flood was unstoppable. They burned everything, my home, my family. They left me alive only to remind me what I lost. Every day since I've carried this. Her voice cracked as she pulled the shawl aside, revealing the full scar across her neck and collarbone, the skin twisted and red as old coals. "This is all I am now, broken, branded." The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of burning wood. Then Tohani spoke. His voice low, steady, carrying weight like stone rolled down a canyon. "Scars are not shame." She blinked at him, anger flaring. "What do you know about shame? About being marked forever?" Without breaking her gaze, Tohani reached up and pulled aside the necklace of bone that rested on his chest. Beneath it, a deep scar curved across his ribs, pale against his bronze skin, old but unforgotten. "This," he said simply, "taken in battle, left me for dead." Eliza's eyes widened. She had not expected that. The scar was long, cruel, proof that his flesh too had been burned, broken, remade. "I live," he continued, his tone unshaken. "The wound did not take my spirit, your scars." His gaze flickered to her face, then back to the fire. "They tell a story of survival, not defeat." The words struck something deep, something she had long buried beneath layers of self-loathing. She turned away, tears blurring her sight. She hated herself for crying, hated how weak it made her feel, but she could not stop. Tohani did not comfort her. He did not cross the fire, did not offer touch or empty words. He only sat in silence, his presence as steady as the desert stone, allowing her to weep without judgment. When her sobs finally quieted, Eliza felt hollow, emptied yet strangely lighter. She wiped her face on her shawl and whispered, "You should have left me. It would have been easier." For the first time that night, Tohani's expression shifted, something like a storm flickering behind his eyes. He leaned forward, voice sharp as flint. "Easier is not always worth living." The words lodged in her chest. She looked at him, at the man who had fought, bled, and now sat across from her with the patience of stone. For the first time since the fire that had destroyed her world, she wondered if she was more than ashes. The desert wind shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite and dust. Eliza drew the shawl tighter, but for once she wasn't hiding. Somewhere within her, an ember stirred. Morning came sharp and clear, the kind of desert dawn that stripped the night bare and left no shadows to hide in. The fire had burned down to gray ash, but its faint warmth still clung to the stones. Eliza stirred first, her shawl wrapped tightly around her as though it could keep her from unraveling. Tohani was already awake. He sat at the edge of the wash, his back straight, long black hair falling loose around his shoulders. He looked like a figure carved out of the very cliff, silent, enduring, untamed. The rising sun painted his scarred chest in copper light, the tribal jewelry across his body glinting. Like small sparks of fire. Eliza pulled the shawl closer, hesitating before speaking. Her voice was quiet, fragile. "You didn't sleep." Tohani did not look at her. His gaze lingered on the horizon, where the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. "The land never sleeps. Neither do those who hunt." She swallowed, tasting dust on her tongue. The words pressed against her throat, begging to be freed. "Why me?" She hated the tremor in her voice. "Why save me? I'm nothing but—" She trailed off, unable to finish, as though naming the ashes would make them real again. Finally, he turned. His dark eyes held her, steady and unyielding. "You are still breathing." The simplicity of it unsettled her. To him, survival itself was worth something. To her, survival had been the cruelest burden of all. She looked down, tears threatening again. Her hands trembled as she pushed the shawl back from her shoulders, revealing the twisted scars that clawed across her neck and collarbone. The firelight of the night before had hidden them. Now the sun showed them in merciless detail. "This is what they left me with. This is who I am." Her voice cracked. "When people look at me, they don't see a woman. They see a wound." The silence stretched. She expected him to turn away. Instead, he rose to his feet, slow and deliberate, the sound of his moccasins brushing the sand. He crossed the space between them, the desert sun outlining the broad muscles of his shoulders, the bone and feather ornaments swaying against his skin. Standing before her, he lowered himself to one knee, his presence filling the air like the weight of thunderclouds. Tohani reached out, not touching, not yet his hand hovering near the scar along her collarbone. "The wound is not who you are," he said, voice low and steady. "It is proof you lived when others could not." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken of her scars as anything but ruin. His words pressed into her chest, heavy and unrelenting, forcing something inside her to shift. Eliza's vision blurred as tears spilled hot and fast. She didn't resist them this time. She let them fall, let them carve tracks through the dust. On her face, Tohani finally touched the edge of her shawl, pulling it gently up to her shoulders again, covering her scars. His eyes lingered on hers. You choose what story they tell, ashes or embers. The words pierced her like a blade but did not wound. Instead, they cut away the silence that had chained her for years. For the first time, she wondered if her life wasn't only an echo of what she had lost, but a fragile spark of what might still be. The desert wind rose, carrying the scent of mesquite and sun-baked earth. Eliza pulled the shawl tight, but her grip was different now, not to hide, but to hold on. Her voice trembled, but it carried. I don't know if I can be what I was. Tohani inclined his head, his long hair falling forward. Do not be what was, be what is. Something shifted inside her then, not a miracle, not a sudden healing, but the faintest flicker of warmth where for so long there had only been cold. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was real. They broke camp in silence. Tohani led the way out of the canyon, his tall frame a steady figure against the rising sun. Eliza followed, her steps unsteady but stronger than the day before. As they climbed toward the open desert, she glanced back at the shallow graves where the raiders lay, the earth still fresh. For years she had been defined by what others had done to her. Now, for the first time, she felt the faintest sense of choice, ashes or embers. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped into the light.